Tonight, we won't walk into tombs as thieves of wonder, nor open sarcophagi just to count the names of kings. Instead, we will stand in the dim corridor between silence and ceremony, where a single lamp breathes over carved stone, and the air tastes faintly of resin and river dust. Here, Anubis waits, not as a god of fear, but as the quiet order that holds both sides of life in balance. His hand does not judge, it steadies. His eyes do not accuse, they remember. Around him, linen folds lie patient, resins memorize the shape of what they protect, and the heart scarab rests where thought once lived. Every breath in this chamber feels measured, as if the air itself were deciding what it deserves to keep. So lower the lights, let the quiet settle in layers the way sand settles over time. And if the old rites of balance make your breathing slow and calm, that's already enough to belong here. Somewhere in the dark, a feather trembles, not from wind, but from memory, as if the air itself remembers being weighed. A doorway painted with stars waits nearby, its threshold drawn not in stone, but in patience. The road beneath it bends like the Nile at night, and a voice soft certain calls the Ba home. It crosses the silence the way a bird crosses water, without sound, without hurry, trusting that the other shore is listening. Low lamps breathe over carved stone. The air smells faintly of resins that have waited for 3,000 years, and the stillness moves with the precision of someone remembering a prayer. Anubis stands at the edge of the light, not as a god of fear, but as a patient craftsman shaping order from silence. His hand steadies what has come apart. His eyes remember what the living forget. Linen folds lie in quiet rows. Natron keeps its cool memory of the sea. Resins trace the outline of thought, and a green scarab rests where the heart once held its weight. Each gesture is measured, mouth sealed so it will not lose its way, sign drawn so the soul will know its house again. The work is calm, not miracle, but method before miracle. Above, it is night in the black land, and in the red land the wind passes without voice. Bread, beer, and the language of offerings keep their steady rhythm. Craftsmen carve stars onto coffin lids so the Ba, returning home, can find its bearings in familiar constellations. Thoth records quietly, the reed pen moving slower than speech. Even the false door in the tomb waits sincerely close to the living, open to what remembers. Ashapti figurines lean forward, ready to serve a promise that will never be called. Canopic jars stand by like four brothers at their posts. Imsidi, Hapi, Duamutef, Kabasanuv, each guarding what must not be misplaced. No one raises their voice. The lamp hums softly, and the air feels like a thought deciding to stay a little longer before leaving. The scale is ready, which is to say it was always ready and is merely noticing you now. On one pan lies a feather, light because truth has the good manners to travel without baggage. On the other pan lies a heart, yours perhaps, or the version of a heart that remembers everything it was supposed to forget and forgets everything it was supposed to remember, which is normal. Anubis studies the beam with a finger that does not push, because pushing is not the point. Thoth, whose handwriting is the type that makes papyrus sit up straighter, records without comment. The pen scratches like a cricket making an inventory. The room is public in the way of vast courtyards where judgment has no hurry. Here truth is not an opinion. It is a measurement with no tolerance. This sounds harsh but feels gentle, like being told the Nile will flood, and then watching it do exactly that, on schedule, year after year, so that grain can relax. Before the weighing, there is speech, but of a careful kind. The soul recites what it did not do, which is the famous negative confession numbered to 42 statements, so the gates of the gnomes are all satisfied, and no local administration feels ignored. No theft, no false measure, no wasted water, no fishing in sacred ponds, even if the fish are making the first move. Each sentence is a small gate. Pass enough small gates, and the road remains a road. It is legalistic in tone, so the tongue will not wander into stories. Anubis appreciates brevity. Truth appreciates the same. If a line is forgotten, the heart remembers. That is one of the things hearts are for, even when they pretend not to be. A scribe could note that the feather belongs to Mat, who is order, balance, the good idea that breathes evenly. She wears a feather as if the world needed a bookmark. She does not attend with trumpets. She attends like a rule you already live by. The scale tips and returns, practicing like a student who does not want to surprise anyone by succeeding. In the corner, incense called kifi unwinds itself with a recipe that reads like a poem line. Raisins, honey, myrrh, cinnamon, and other ingredients that seem perfectly edible but were instead given to the air, which happily eats scent. If you drift for a moment, that is appropriate. The 42 assessors, being functionaries, are not offended by naps. They preside with the calm of clerks who have seen centuries, and therefore know that most things resolve into paper and dust. Anubis waits without blinking because the mask does that for him, which is efficient. When the beam wavers, not from anxiety, but from the usual movements of a room with breath in it, the quiet shadow near the floor elongates. This is Ammit, whose name means she will eat what should not proceed. She is crocodile and lion and hippo, joined into a single appetite that does not roar. It simply is. Her justice is not torture, but erasure, like a page burned clean rather than struck through. It is a policy decision. No second trial follows. The corridor does not open. The journey sits down politely and ends. Fear is not required to understand this. It is enough to consider how papyrus becomes papyrus by being stripped and pressed and put to use. Those strips that are not pressed never become pages, and nobody is angry about them. Still, there are helps along the way, and the Egyptians, being thorough, supplied many. A polished scarab bears a little text that asks the heart to keep its peace and not rise against its owner, which is a charmingly direct appeal. Family offerings strengthen the voice. Bread and beer are good for speech, as every festival discovered. A priest reads a rubric written in red ink so the breath can find the right syllables. And if your tongue wants to pronounce the names of those small deities who stand guard at thresholds, it may, though Anubis will not grade the accent. He adjusts what can be adjusted, a speck of dust brushed from the scale, a silence restored to the room, the reassurance that the feather is unbruised. Even mercy is practical here. It says, make the test fair and then trust the weight. You may be thinking of modern devices that count steps or measure sleep and send you charts with cheerful colors. The scale is like that, but interested in honesty rather than cardio. Somewhere, a jar painted with the face of Hapi the baboon watches over a liver with the affection of a careful librarian. The 4 sons of Horus stand as if they have never been surprised by anything, which, considering their job description, is plausible. Outside the chamber, the duet arranges itself into regions with names that sound like advice whispered through sand. A place for the field of knives, inconvenient but navigable. A place for lakes that ask for the correct word before permitting a sip. You pass through not by force, but by remembering politely. Anubis does not hurry you because haste is for boats racing daylight, and this is a hallway with its own clock. Occasionally, a flicker like the wing of the bow brushes your cheek, and you remember a rooftop where you once watched birds arguing about nothing at all and felt completely content. When feather and heart agree, doors open without drama, as if hinges learned courtesy from years of temple service. Beyond is a wide brightness that does not glare. Canals that mirror the sky, fields that stay exactly green enough, not too eager. This is the field of reeds. Work continues here, but without drought and without loss. Sowing happens at a pace even a sleepy sower can respect. Harvesting is careful rather than urgent, and eating happens with the remembered, which means stories do not need to be invented because the people themselves are present. The ba comes, and goes like a neighbor with a key, exploring by day and returning by night to the name on the door, which is the finest address. Pleasure is precise, not endless. It arrives in the correct season and bows slightly and leaves when it should. You may sit on the bank and watch a boat pass with a square sail like an afterthought, the way boats prefer to be. A breeze moves the papyrus and writes something private on the water. There are still lists, because Egyptians believed in lists the way bees believe in hexagons. But the lists are of good things already occurring, which is very restful. Meanwhile, the living keep what they can keep. Bread and beer arrive as offerings with the quiet optimism of parcels, and a small lamp is lit so a voice may travel when miles are in the way. Names are spoken at stele, so identity does not thin with weather. A well-tended tomb becomes a contract between households, one above and one below, everyone paying on time with memory. If you have ever labeled a box carefully and felt the relief of knowing it will not be mistaken for trash, you already understand the principle. The false door accepts a knock that is more a thought than a sound. The Ashabdi stand at easy attention, prepared to say, "Here I am," if tasks arise, though the task might be as gentle as watering a patch of barley that is already doing perfectly fine. Somewhere, a cow-eared goddess smiles, because joy is permitted, faintly warm and never loud. The scale rests now, feather unruffled, heart content to be exactly itself. Anubis turns the lamp a little lower the way an old friend would, not to end the night, only to make it softer. If you drift, the room will keep you. If you remain, the pen will keep writing its thin, soothing cricket song, and the river will keep its schedule without consulting the stars, because the stars and the river have had an understanding for a very long time. You might wonder, passing through this brightness, whether all this detail is necessary, and the answer is that the Egyptians believed detail was the polite shape of care. Each small rule kept chaos busy elsewhere. Each carefully tied bandage resisted forgetting. Even the recipe for kiffe was preserved in multiple versions, some of which read like a kitchen note to a distracted apprentice who was perhaps listening to a story about Osiris and missed the moment when the honey should be stirred. The heart scarab bears a line that could be translated many ways, but always means, in essence, "Please be on my side when truth is measuring." It is the kind of request a friend makes quietly in a courtyard with shade. In modern terms, imagine writing a sticky note to yourself and leaving it where you will definitely see it, like the door or the mirror or the back of your phone. The amulets do not mind being compared to stationery. They admire usefulness. Even Ammit, who is not invited to banquets, occupies a place that keeps the corridors honest. Somewhere in the administrative calm of the afterlife, a clerk adds a line to a ledger and sand falls through an invisible hourglass that no one checks because it never misbehaves. If you feel your breath lengthen, the scale approves. If you begin to forget what you intended to remember, Thoth promises to write it down anyway. In the field of reeds, a farmer examines a canal gate that opens and closes on time, and he nods because schedules are a kind of prayer. The wind, which in life liked to take the topsoil when no one was looking, here agrees to be interesting but not disruptive. Papyrus grows with such impeccable verticality that architects feel seen. Somewhere a cat wraps itself around a chair leg and considers the philosophy of being worshipped and not minding. You may, if you like, imagine the bay perching on a reed, tilting its human-faced head as if weighing a feather of its own. Anubis, who understands scales and watches, adjusts the lamp again, smaller now, like the moon just after the month has begun. The corridor does not end. It continues without insisting. The names for gates remain available. Your tongue can choose them or not, and the doors will remember their tasks either way. The feather rests, the heart rests, the room rests. If you are still awake, that is acceptable. Sleep will arrive as steadily as a clerk with the right papyrus at the correct desk. If you sleep, Anubis will keep handwriting from smudging and will mark the right page with a ribbon. In the quiet, everything remains balanced, and everything tired finds its surface, and the lamp which began by breathing over stone now breathes, more softly like a river at the hour when boats tie their ropes and do not talk about tomorrow. It is a small thing, almost nothing, the way a reed trembles when the river inhales before dusk, and yet that is the hour the night boat likes best to be noticed. The day boat has a brighter name and a schedule that is loud with color, but the night boat, the Mythology, prefers to be recognized the way a cat prefers to be greeted from across the room with a quiet blink. A rope, older than many kingdoms and yet forever recently mended, loosens from a peg that remembers every knot ever asked of it. The deck smells of cedar that has practiced being calm for centuries. Set steps aboard with the careful indifference of someone who has already done tonight, has worked many thousands of times, and knows that doing it once more will neither ruin nor redeem anything, which is a very restful kind of certainty. His animal head, which scholars still argue about over tea, faces the gentle current, not to threaten it, only to acknowledge flow as a colleague. Around him the crew gathers in the kind of silence that is full of jobs. Who stands ready with words that know when to behave? Ciel brings perception like a lantern that never advertises its batteries. Heka is there too, quiet as a tool shelf in a tidy workshop. The serpent Mahine coils along the gunwale like a safety rail that is also a lullaby. No one remarks on the stars rehearsing themselves in the water. If you are listening from a dim room, you are already part of this boarding procedure. Dim rooms and sacred boats have always admired each other's priorities. And if later you find yourself still awake, you can choose to subscribe or not subscribe the way a scribe chooses to sharpen the reed now or after one more line. I will not check, and the boat certainly will not. It is too busy being exactly the speed the night prefers. There is fussing, but it is the gentle kind of fussing that makes people feel safe. A priest whose job title is mostly dust now hums the opening hymn under his breath to be sure it has not misplaced a syllable. The mast accepts a cloth that glows a little with old sunlight. Sails like to keep souvenirs. On the prow, a small figure points toward the horizon that happens to be underground at the moment. The crew do not speak of battles because they do not experience them as battles. They speak of procedures. Apep, or apophis if you want the Greek to feel included, is entered into the log as a recurring interruption, like a sandbar that refuses to read memos. Set's task is written as ensures passage, which is very nearly customer service. If there is thunder in him, it is the kind that stays inside clouds and chooses not to be weather. He stands by the rail, not glaring into the dark, but politely noticing it. A knife is present because a knife is a tool, but it is the sort of tool that mostly appreciates being oiled, counted, wrapped, and put back. The Jewett opens with its usual formalities, gates that like their names pronounce correctly, lakes that prefer compliments before they offer a sip, fields where blades of grass are almost as tall as a thought and lean the same way thoughts lean when they are about to become sentences. The boat moves without the drama of moving, the way earth turns while pretending it is the sky that travels. Set checks the lashings where man's coils meet the planks. He likes a good fastening. When he thinks of chaos, he thinks of frayed rope ends, not philosophy. Somewhere near the stern, Thoth marks the time in a writing that becomes the time. He does this without eye contact. It is a kindness to the minutes. The others relax into tasks that are as old as they are. Up ahead, silence arranges itself into a tunnel and then decides to be a plain corridor instead. The crew prefer corridors. They reduce speculation. Some myths describe the confrontation as if noise were necessary, but the boat does not agree, and neither does Set. Apep thickens from the dark with the shy confidence of a long story clearing its throat, and Set acknowledges the event the way a porter acknowledges a step that is always in the same inconvenient place. There are words to say, but they are said softly, and some are not said at all because thinking them works just as well. Who breathes an utterance that was measured long ago to be the right length for serpents and knights? Heka loosens a knot in the air and ties it again, which sounds like nothing but keeps the hull exactly itself. Ciel looks into the mouth of the problem and nods, as if to say, yes, that is a mouth, thank you. Mayhem tightens one loop, not to strangle anything, simply to remind the edges of where they belong. Set lifts the oar that is for encouragement rather than speed and lays it down again, a gesture that tells the water it is cooperating beautifully. Apep, having been included in the paperwork, behaves like a cloud covering a moon it will later uncover without apology. In some papyri, the serpent is cut in 12 pieces, one for each night hour, but paperwork has many versions. Tonight the cutting is administrative. Pages are separated, not flesh. Set stamps a seal on the incident, which looks a lot like turning his head slightly to the left. The crew admire the efficiency. The boat continues, as boats do, listing not even a little. Far overhead, the day remembers to end somewhere you once ate lentils and laughed for no reason. It is nice to have that in the file. If you lean with the boat, you can feel how the planks talk to each other through the pegs. The conversation is slow and intensely practical. This board has expanded. That board will wait. The sound is exactly the size of a mouse choosing which crumb is a personality fit. Set, sometimes advertised as storm and desert, is at ease on wood. He likes a place with a plan. He likes that the night is divided into hours with names and guardians who can be greeted like neighbors, watering the same garden on different days. He likes that the helmsman doesn't need to be told he is doing well. When people later say that Set is trouble, he understands. Most reputations are a compost of very true and very old things, but on this deck, his role is a deeply boring heroism, the kind that keeps everything from being interesting. He prefers it that way. He once broke a jar stubbornly stuck in the corner of his storeroom and felt the spiritual benefits of decisive maintenance. That story did not make it onto temple walls, which is evidence the walls had standards. The crew shares small remarks about tastefully irrelevant topics. Whether the keffi recipe is sweeter when the raisins are from a particular bend of the river, whether the sail likes to be folded the same way every time or is comforted. By variety, whether the scorpion goddess Circuit prefers the north side of an amulet or the south. No one will test this. They are busy and the scorpion is in charge of her own preferences. The moon, which is amicable, lends a suggestion of shape to the darkness, and then takes it back with a smile you can feel but not see. If you are beginning to drift, the boat approves, because boats privately believe sleep is a form of successful travel. The hours pass the way well-behaved hours pass, by becoming themselves and then allowing the next one to turn. In the 5th hour, the crew check the ropes again, because checking is not suspicion, it is affection with the schedule. In the 7th, Ahem remembers that Ray will be old in the morning and young in the afternoon, which is a trick only the sun and certain well-rested people manage. Set runs a finger along a seam and finds it exactly as it should be. He tries to look unimpressed. He succeeds. The helmsman, who is sometimes also a god and sometimes just a very competent helmsman, adjusts nothing. The lake that must be crossed is in a good mood. The gate that usually asks a riddle settles for spelling its own name because it enjoys the letters. The crew allow themselves the treat of silence again. When Apep thinks about returning, which it does on principle, it finds the same arrangements waiting, a coil that is already occupied, a word that has already been said, a posture that has already been chosen. Set is patient with recurrence. He understands that a serpent is only doing its job by arriving, and he is only doing his by being exactly where the serpent expects him to be, holding exactly the calm the serpent cannot swallow. The confrontation shrinks to the size of an eyelid, deciding whether to blink now or later. Blink, do not blink. The boat keeps its line. Somewhere the stars pretend to be reflections of themselves, so the river will not feel responsibility for their movement. This is courtesy, and the gods approve of courtesy almost as much as they approve of offerings that arrive on clean plates. At certain points, the crew tidy the deck with a devotion that suggests tidying might be the true theology. Bits of sand are brushed into the Nile with a soft broom made from a plant that has been very patient all its life. A jar is set a finger's width farther from the mast, which solves a problem no one had yet noticed. The oars are stacked so their handles line up as if they were examples in a lesson about parallel lines that remembers to be kind to people who prefer curves. Set lifts a coil of rope and sets it down in a neater circle, which is the quietest victory available to an evening. Heka inspects a minor spell for creases and finds none but smooths the air anyway, because smoothing is a philosophy. Xiao goes to the prow and looks at nothing in a way that persuades nothing to continue being nothing, which is a valuable skill that does little for one's social calendar. The crew have a small conversation about dates, the fruit, not the appointment, and about how the best ones taste like the memory of sunlight that stayed to help sweep up. Someone mentions that the day boat is called the Manjet and the night boat is called the Mesiktet, and everyone nods as if these are not names but habits, which in a way they are. The river hums under the planks with the contentment of a large animal that has finally gotten comfortable and would prefer not to be looked at directly. Set stretches his shoulders in the manner of a jackal who has owned many horizons and found them adequate. If you feel like yawning, the crew will take it as a compliment to their risk management. Every now and then a breeze leans against the sail just to check whether help is desired. Help is not desired, but appreciation is offered anyway in case the breeze has feelings. The stars rehearse the plot everyone already knows, and to avoid boredom, change nothing. A small scarab that has no respect for official roles walks across the deck and forgets what it wanted at the fourth plank, which happens to many of us. Set watches it with the tolerance of an uncle who has seen enough nephews to understand that enthusiasm is its own reason. In the far distance, way beyond where distance pretends to end, a temple drummer practices the same 3 beats with such dedication that they become a landscape. The Mesiktet translates those beats into movement so smooth the water believes it chose the plan. When the 9th hour asks who is at the helm, the answer is competence, which is an acceptable divine name when paperwork is involved. The serpent remembers again that it has always tried, and Set remembers again that he has always replied. And the exchange is so old, it has worn itself into a rut comfortable enough to be a bed. In that bed, the world sleeps while still doing its job. It is not a bad arrangement. A goose calls once because geese, and the sound falls into the duet and decides to be a star for a few seconds, just to see what that feels like. Observations such as these do not make it into theology, which is probably why theology remains dignified. By the time the last hours lean into each other like tired friends, the prow has gathered a small necklace of dew. The deck is faint with the promise of a color that has not fully invented itself. Set looks toward a horizon that is presently on the wrong side of the earth and decides it will be fine. He is not a poet about light. He cares about the part where the light arrives when the ledger says it should. He has had, he thinks, a satisfying night of preventing unnecessary excitement. When people later tell stories with thunder in them, he will not argue. Thunder is a good sound for evenings that want to be remembered by people who were not there. But on the boat, on most nights, the important noise is the whisper that rope makes when it forgives a knot for happening again. Maine uncoils a fraction, the way one loosens a scarf when a room remembers to be warm. Heka stacks a last invisible tool in a box no one else can see. Who tucks a syllable behind another syllable so the sentence will not feel lonely in daylight? Xiao glances into the wake, not to learn anything new, only to confirm that the old things have not been misplaced. Thoth closes the book without an ending because the night does not conclude. It pauses to allow cereal to be eaten. Overhead, the day begins to rehearse being young. The Mesictet glides toward the place where names change, and the Manjet clears its throat politely. Set checks the pegs, then checks the checking, and finds everything in order. If you are sleeping now, the crew will continue at their exact pace without discussing it. If you are still awake, you may allow your eyes to choose their own work hours. Either way, the boat keeps to its line, and the river agrees to be river until further notice. Somewhere a small shrine on a household shelf warms with the first touch of color. The person who will light the morning wick is still dreaming of something they will not describe because there is bread to bake. In that dream, a rope is coiled correctly and stays that way. The boat accepts the handover that is not a ceremony and allows the day to claim the sky. Set steps back as quietly as he arrived. He does not need thanks because boats that arrive exactly on time are thanks enough. The serpent withdraws into its job description and will return when the paperwork says so. Maine rests like a thought that can be picked up later without fraying. The cedar breathes once through the grain and is satisfied. If you are somewhere between waking and sleep, you may keep drifting along the same black water, practicing calm the way a deck practices levelness. The Mesictet is not gone. It is simply not the part you can see at the moment. The night will remember itself again, and the same crew will line up in the same order, and the same gentle arguments about reasons will occur, and the oars will lie together, like old friends who always meet at the same table and order the same bowl of something simple. Nothing is resolved, and nothing needs resolving. The current continues to agree with itself. The sky rehearses being pale and then performs it. Set stands with one hand on a post that has outlived empires and watches nothing in particular with the intense concentration of someone who has made a career of keeping corridors boring. The river says yes in very small waves. The decks answers with a barely audible yawn of wood. Somewhere the first bird is thinking about singing and also thinking about not singing, and both options seem reasonable. If you drift further now, the boat will count that as successful passage. If you stay, the boat will let you. The knot holds. The feather of Matt stays where it always stays. Light is a habit you no longer need to remember you learned, and the hours, being well brought up, file past without comment into another night where everything important will happen again, exactly as softly. It begins with the quietest kind of carpentry, the sort that takes a piece of wood and asks it politely to remember being a tree. In a courtyard that is more shade than space, a chest is measured with a string that has learned to be honest. The grain smells faintly of river wind and old sun. Someone rubs oil into the corners until the corners admit they are corners. This chest and later stories will have very busy adventures, but tonight it is considered mostly for its excellent workmanship and the way its lid fits like a sentence settling into grammar. Egyptians admired a good fit, so does sleep. Even the hinges prefer not to surprise anyone. They open without clearing their throats. If you are listening with your room dim and your pillow cooperating, you are already in agreement with the workshop. And if, after a few minutes, you are still awake, you may subscribe in the spirit of a temple ledger that welcomes neat handwriting, or not subscribe like a farmer who prefers mental notes. I will never check. The chest is not concerned either. It is devoted to being a shape that can be understood at a glance, a satisfying rectangle surrounded by patient air. There is a certain sarcasm to cedar when it becomes furniture for gods and kings. It used to be a mountain story, and now it is a storage solution. The chest carries the perfume of resin as if it has opinions about desserts, which it might. Patterns are burned gently into the surface by someone who likes geometry the way bees like hexagons, not as a theory, but as a physical relief. A corner is tested with a fingertip and finds itself square, which is a small joy that requires no celebration. In one telling of the myth, the chest is made to fit a particular body, but in this soft version, it is simply well made, and that is already intimate. The courtyard keeps a light breeze and a no-nonsense sparrow that lands on a beam as if to audit the work. People hum because humming fills the gaps between steps. They hum a melody that has been convenient for centuries. Somewhere a scribe glances up to enjoy the symmetry and then returns to his column of numbers with the satisfaction of someone who has converted chaos into a table. The chest is sanded once more for kindness. It makes a sound like the beginning of a sentence that does not need to be finished. There are inlays that pretend to be water and a border that pretends to be reeds, subtle shallow lines, not eager to be noticed. The lid is tried again. It lowers with the authority of a thought you have had before and found reliable. Later, you will hear about a river and a palace and places far away. The chest will travel because stories like travel. In some very old words, it floats along the Nile as steadily as a calendar turning a page. The river has a good relationship with buoyancy. It approves of objects that choose calm. At night, when fishermen wrap their nets like blankets and promise to wake early whether they mean it or not, the chest passes without asking for attention. Crocodiles, who are famously indifferent to most programming, drift past with professional courtesy. In daylight, the boatmen who see the chest say something polite about craftsmanship and return to their oars, because the oars are persuasive colleagues. Many things in Egypt rely on cooperation rather than dramatic announcements. A current, for example, is simply water going somewhere consistently. The chest rests in that, and the current enjoys the compliment. On we go, under sycamores that lean over the water like old ants, making sure everyone has eaten enough. Reeds nod as if to say, yes, that is a rectangle. We respect rectangles. There is a rumor that the breeze has learned the cedar's name and uses it quietly, just often enough to be friendly. When the sea arrives, it does not roar. It simply suggests more room. The chest agrees to that suggestion and allows itself to be a small traveling thought on a very large page. Waves practice being identical and succeed almost perfectly, which is what makes watching them so restful. Byblos waits in that patient way port cities wait, with ropes coiled and stories coiling too. Carpenters there will notice the chest with the professional curiosity of people who cannot notice corners. A queen will think it would make an excellent pillar and will not be wrong. The tree that receives it will be proud to assist. In the palace courtyard, cranes of wood and ropes that trust each other lift the future column into place. No one imagines drama. Everything is an improvement to the room. The chest goes from box to beam with barely a fuss, and the building purrs like a cat that has swallowed a secret and found it nutritionally satisfying. Workers smooth plaster around the pillar and step back in the universal gesture of craft, which is to say they wiggle their shoulders until approval settles on them. Isis comes into these stories like a soft instruction written in margins and very neat handwriting. She is the person in the household who knows where everything is, including the needle that hides from everyone else. Her magic is not thunder. It is the endless patience of someone who will untie the knot because it is better for the string to be string. She walks with the calm of a woman who has been around libraries and knows the shelf order. She follows the scent of resin as if it is a map. In Byblos, the queen finds her charming the way cats find warm spots. Everyone enjoys good manners, and Isis is an education in them. She does not argue with the pillar about being a pillar. She thanks it for its service and waits for the moment when asking will be useful. Rituals lean toward those who do not hurry. When the chest finally returns to her hands, it does so with the dignity of a guest who leaves a party without disturbing any cups. She cleans it like a priest cleans the first hour of morning with careful circles. She hums because humming has always helped hands remember their work. The lid fits. For a long time, nothing else is required of the night. There are other objects that join the scene, practical shy things with jobs. A bandage made from linen that remembers the field where it was sunlight. A jar of natron that has sighed about salt since before anyone bothered to turn soil with a plow. A small knife that exists mostly to be wiped clean and put back. An object with self-esteem but no performative tendencies. At the edge of the lamp's light, the jackal-faced god stands not as a judge but as a technician. Anubis keeps the tone of the room steady, which is a kind of genius. He approves of Isis' method because method is devotion that has stood up and gone to work. She arranges, she speaks low, she knots and unknots the names of things as if names are threads. The spells she uses were written down long ago by people who enjoyed accuracy and did not mind copying the same line 3 times just to be sure the ink looks satisfied. Occasionally, Thoth leans over the idea of the page and adds a small correction no one will notice, but future grammar will adore. It is all very domestic. Gods are often at their best when they are tiding, which is why gardens around temples have such excellent paths. Now and then, in these soft tellings, a bird calls from somewhere outside the walls and then thinks about it again and becomes quiet. The night has the sound of textiles resting. Isis does not rush, not because she cannot, but because rushing in a sacred room is like running with a full bowl of soup, an activity that annoys both soup and floor. She arranges amulets with a librarian's sense for cross-references. A jed pillar stands up for stability in the way solid things like to stand. A tie-it knot suggests protection that behaves like a kindly ant. The chest is not only a container now, it is a direction of travel for the hands. You notice perhaps that sorrow in these old stories prefers the company of work. It settles more easily when linen folds are even and the knots sit where knots should sit. People who have ever cleaned a kitchen in a thoughtful mood will recognize the impulse. If a memory leaks, it is captured and folded into another layer, not to hide it but to give it weight. Work is the opposite of being lost. The lamp takes a slow breath and keeps it. Some versions tell of a brief, embarrassed storm of chaos that prefers to be offstage in this lullaby. We do not need it. Set is elsewhere doing his night boat job, ordinary and useful, as previously discussed. Here, there is only the small economy of hands and breath. They bring a body into conversation with time again, not loudly, but with the steadiness of a clock that refuses trauma. A green scarab will sit where thought used to sit, not to pretend to be thought, but to remind the heart to speak on the heart's behalf when the scale is bothered with questions later. That scale waits very far away, patient as ledgers. For now, the room is full of linen, quietly becoming history. When the work pauses, even the silence takes a polite step forward and offers its help. The chest stands by like a well-behaved friend who understands that being present is often the entire skill. You might like to think about the field of reeds just briefly, but the thought will not insist. In that place where harvest is punctual and conversations are the correct length, Isis will sit sometimes and rest her hands. She will watch a canal gate open with that irresistible little clack of wood against wood and feel the approval of sensible engineering. People there keep promises with the ease of breathing. Osiris, who is very good at being king of a place that asks mostly for fairness and gardening, will walk with her without summary. They will discuss irrigation as if it were a poem, which in Egypt it nearly was. No one will fix anything big because nothing is broken. There's a joy in small maintenance, the sharpened sickle, the clean jar, the tidy list of grain rations. If an ibis wanders by, Thoth may gently check whether the bird is on some official errand or merely being handsome. Either is acceptable. The hours there do not tick, they lounge. The sun obliges by arriving with the same courtesy every day. Back in the world with edges, the chest grows less important, which is how good objects retire. It becomes a container for scented cloths, perhaps, and a story that people tell quietly to remind themselves that wood can be loyal and that resin has very long memory. Craftsmen continue to rub oil into corners long after the original corners have been replaced, because habits once learned by the hands petition to remain. In houses along the river, small cupboards learn to close softly because their owners like it when things behave. Cats invent new rules for sleeping in sunbeams and enforce them with exemplary laziness. Bread rises reliably, beer ferments with discreet enthusiasm. Dates insist on tasting like small brown sunsets. A child's doll gets a miniature chest that opens and closes with a heroic squeak. Isis visits as a superstition that is just manners in another outfit. She keeps her needle where she can find it. The pillar in the Byblos Palace continues holding up its part of the ceiling and feels fairly famous about it in a minimalist way. Even in temple halls, which love drama when painted and silence when lived in, the story of the chest becomes something practical. Priests remind each other that containers want honesty. Scribes draw little rectangles in the margins when a paragraph behaves itself. The smell of cedar notes the hour when doors are open for air and closed again for focus. At dusk, when the river inhales as it always does, boats are tied with a particular knot that does not slip, but also does not resent being untied, because resentment is poor seamanship. Somewhere, a woman mends a basket and hums the old melody. Somewhere else, an old man starches a collar and pretends it is still a reed, lying in the marsh learning to stand straight. In kitchens, someone taps the bottom of a jar to encourage the last grain to come out, and the jar is grateful for the conversation. All of it is a long aftercare for a moment when wood, water, and will agree on a shape. If you are still awake, we can balance the lid again, not to finish anything, just to feel the soft click as it meets the box. If you are asleep, the lid can wait in the position it prefers for sleeping minds, almost closed but not quite. The chest has a patience that exceeds many empires. It will sit in the corner of the room like a reliable thought you do not need to hold actively. It knows its weight, its dimensions, the way light rests on it differently at morning and at evening. It understands that it is most itself when it is not performing. Isis would approve. She liked objects that accepted their jobs with dignity and without advertising. She liked hands that did the next small task. The night leans in a little. The lamp imagines itself to be a small sun with a more flexible schedule. You may imagine the cedar fibers aligning quietly like people in a line that will certainly reach the counter. The grain looks like the river drawn by someone who has been watching the river for a long time. The hinges agree not to squeak. Air moves through the room as if checking the inventory. The story continues to be mostly about care taking the shape of things: a chest, a pillar, a bed where someone breathes and then breathes again. Nothing is concluded. The courtyard goes on being shade. The reed remembers wind. And the night keeps its unremarkable promises one by one, a list so gentle you can nap on it. A quiet place to begin is a hut made of reeds that enjoy minding their own business. The walls breathe a little with the marsh wind. The floor is a woven mat that remembers the fingers that braided it. The doorway prefers to be shade with intentions. In this hut, a woman tells a small child about the way geese announce dawn long before dawn has signed the paperwork. The woman is patient in the particular way that can move mountains without ever addressing them directly. She is Isis, who knows where the jar lids live and why the lamp burns better when you talk to it as if it were an old friend. The child is Horus, not the hawk in the sky just yet, more a pair of serious eyes that have already learned the politics of naps. The marsh is a good neighborhood for secrets because everything here rustles politely, and rustling is a kind of confidentiality. If you are listening in a room that has decided to be soft, you are already in the right kind of conversation. If after a little while you find yourself still awake, you may subscribe with the same generous lack of urgency as a fisherman adding one more knot to a tune. Rope for no reason other than that knots like company, or you may not, and the papyrus will keep leaning anyway. No one in the story is prepared to check. The point is to drift as gently as boats that believe the river chose them. The hut has a small shelf that holds jars of things that know what they're for. There's honey, because honey in Egypt is a universal apology and a small miracle that fits in a spoon. There is oil that smells faintly like afternoons. There is natron in a bowl that has seen many hands and very few arguments. 7 scorpions stand guard outside the hut in the friendly, unsmiling way of professionals. Circuit, who knows more about stings than most, has provided them as a neighborhood watch with tails. They are not here to frighten anyone. They are here to remind trouble it forgot a meeting elsewhere. Isis thanks them as she passes because gratitude is an effective technology. She ties a cord across the doorway so that anyone entering has to think about the threshold and remember to be kind. Horus watches everything the way a cat watches a new box, with interest that is almost stillness. He naps as an educational strategy. When he wakes, he blinks as if he has an appointment with sunlight and is deciding whether to keep it. Sometimes she whispers letters to him, the old letters that make up the names of things. Names are very obedient when whispered. They line up and do their jobs with barely a shrug. On a certain afternoon that has forgotten to be urgent, the marsh has a visitor you would not notice if you were new here. It is the kind of day when the air is full of the sound linen makes when it rests after being washed, which is not a sound so much as a decision. A sting happens outside where it will not disturb the furniture. The 7 scorpions handle it with professional paperwork. Isis brings honey because honey asks pain if it would like to turn into a lesson, and pain often agrees. If a child is frightened, he learns that comfort moves at the speed of hands. A small prayer is said not loudly because loudness does not help the herbs do their main work of being herbs. The hut acknowledges the moment the way a reed acknowledges wind, by swaying briefly and then remembering uprightness. Later, there is a quiet meal. Bread that tastes like the sun had a conversation with grain and everyone got along. Beer that remembers the river in a cheerful way. Horus gets a drop of something sweet and counts it as a treaty. The scorpions return to their watch, a living punctuation at the edge of evening. If you're thinking that a goddess with 7 scorpions is dramatic, consider that this is the marsh. 7 of anything here is just good manners. When Horus is a little taller and the reed mat has acquired the friendly rare patterns of a family, the days collect stories the way shelves collect jars. He likes to sit where the doorway's shade meets the light and measure boats with his eyes. Some are made of wood that sailed from far places to become local. Some are bundles of papyrus tied into aspiration and set afloat, all of them full of people who figured out which side of an oar is the business end. Isis tells him the names of the hours as if they're cousins they will definitely meet at festivals. She tells him about the field of reeds, which is not a rumor but a well-tended expectation. She says that in that place you harvest on time and never lose a sheaf to carelessness, and Horus nods as though he already enjoys punctual grain. She does not talk about thunder. She talks about recipes. The recipe for calm breath, in then out, and then do that again, as if the air were a polite guest and you were passing the bowl. It works on children and on teens and on people who are accidentally both. Small myths secrete. A headdress is practiced on a clay jar. A piece of blue stone is polished into a thought and kept in a corner where light can learn it by heart. In the marsh, privacy is more cooperative than secretive. Neighbors bring fish wrapped in leaves, and a woman whose name you will not hear in songs shows Isis a better way to wash papyrus so it dries flatter, and the goddess receives this information with the same grace she would offer queens, because useful knowledge is royal wherever it sits. Thoth visits in the shape of an ibis once, and pretends to be entirely about water insects. He was terrible at pretending, but everyone agrees not to mention it. He drops a fragment of math on the ground and wanders off. Isis picks it up and smiles a very small smile. Later, she will show Horace how the eye his eye, though that is a future detail, can be drawn as a measuring system for grain. 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, 1/64. The way a loaf can be fairly shared without anyone needing a speech. 63/64 is almost the whole, which is how the world often behaves, complete enough to be useful, incomplete enough to keep conversation interesting. This makes Horace fond of fractions and of eyes. He likes that both can look at a field and tell you how much work remains without insulting the field. Word comes, as word does, that there will be a hearing, the kind of long courtroom afternoon in which gods speak, and the room has opinions about seating. The tribunal will gather because tribunals dislike unsolved items on their tablets. Horace is to present himself as the claimant of a throne with dust on it, but good bones. Isis is not alarmed. She has been preparing a child for the world, which is a more compelling legal document than most. The marsh wraps them in quiet and lets them go. On the way, other gods nod in the manner of colleagues who have read the brief. Wepwallet, who opens the way, opens it without commentary, which is his highest form of praise. Matt is present in that light that makes shadows queue up politely. Ro attends, but looks as if he could be convinced to nap between testimonies, which is typical of elders with many sons behind them. The scene could be dramatic in another telling, but here it is mostly the sound of papyrus being adjusted under elbows, and the soft murmur that chairs make when they remember their job as support. If you picture a fan moving just enough air to keep attention awake, but not enough to disturb a single feather, you have the mood exactly. The arguments are not thunder. They are footnotes. Horace speaks in a voice trained by reed beds to keep the volume near river. He talks about rightness the way a farmer talks about plowing, as a thing that happens because it should. Isis offers a remark when the room forgets it has a memory. Her remarks are mild and always have a small practical suggestion attached, like, perhaps we use the good ink. Set raises counterpoints that, in this version, sound like the careful observations of someone who has truly looked at desserts and found them beautiful and difficult in equal measure. The hearing takes as long as hearings take, which is to say long enough for the sun to wander in the court as high windows and decorate the floor with opinions. Thoth keeps the minutes and improves the spelling of a few divine names so they will read better in stone. The 42 assessors make little approving noises when a sentence lands neatly, because functionaries love precision. There's tea, there's perhaps a biscuit. If Horace fidgets, it is the dignified fidget of a person who knows the exact number of rush strands and the mat under his feet. You might think of modern meetings where the decision was reached long before anyone prepared the slides. And the slides are mostly to keep the day occupied until the official nod can be delivered. Gods also enjoy procedure. At some point, as hours turn themselves over like lazy fish, the eye becomes a topic. Not the eye that watches hawks find thermals, not even the eye that knows how to look kingly from a wall painting, but the eye that is also a fraction, the one Thoth restores and scribes copy with the quiet devotion of people who admire a symbol that can do chores. There is a story about how the eye once had a difficult day and needed a physician and a friend, and Thoth obliged by being both. The details of that day can be exciting if you breathe on them too hard, so we will not. What matters in this drowsy telling is that the eye became a measure for grain and beer and fairness. 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, down and down, a gentle staircase you can take even in sandals meant for feasts. It is comforting to know that a royal emblem also tells you how much flour a recipe needs, as if a crown moonlights as a measuring cup. In households, women who have never seen the inside of a temple draw the little teardrop lines of the wedget on walls near the pantry for luck, and the jars feel seen. In courts, a scribe notes that the total is not quite a whole, and Matt smiles because truth often comes in slightly less than then relies on kindness to complete the sum. Back in the marsh, which continues to be the world's best listener, Isis sometimes teaches Horus with objects. She lays out 6 small pebbles on the mat and moves them into fractions without using the word fractions, because the word is not necessary for the understanding. He slides the pebbles until they feel like a complete shape. He will do this all his life, moving pieces until they settle into a picture everyone can live in. She shows him a feather and the scale carved on a cosmetic spoon. The spoon pretends to be an ankh in miniature and almost succeeds. Household things like to moonlight as philosophy. A neighbor brings a jar of beer and a complaint about a goat with leadership ambitions. Isis resolves the goat's aspirations with a gate latch and a speech about grass that the goat finds persuasive. Horus learns that judgment is sometimes a matter of explaining a hinge to a goat. He is very pleased by this. The 7 scorpions listen from under a basket and reserve judgment, which is appropriate for scorpions. In the distance, you can hear field hands singing the song that keeps the rhythm of pulling weeds, a song that has the gift of sounding exactly the same, whether sung by 5 people or 50. The tribunal, when it has finished admiring its own procedures, produces a verdict in the manner of sunrise, slow, obvious, and somehow still satisfying. The throne, dusty but intact, will be Horus' seat. In our soft version, this moment does not require trumpets. It requires a brush and a clean cloth. Isis will take him to the high place and see that the cushion is straight. She will straighten a cushion for a king. She might remind him not to put cups on the edge of things. She will advise him to keep a good relationship with grain. He will nod, because it is easy to nod when you are mostly bird and mostly boy and mostly ready. Set, who we have agreed is very good at keeping boats safe at night, goes to do exactly that, which is a respectable occupation for anyone, and particularly so for a god in need of a hobby the world approves of. The room exhales. Thoth dots the last determinative the way a kindly teacher dots an I for a student whose pen was tired. The 42 assessors shuffle papers that are stone and declare themselves satisfied by the proportions of truth to silence. We could stop there, and in long stories, people sometimes do, but bedtime is generous with continuations that behave like blankets. The years that follow are full of the kinds of tasks that make kingdoms sleepy again after excitement. Accounts to check, canals to clear, measurements to agree on, festivals to schedule so they land on favorable days. Horus practices standing where breezes like to find kings and ruffle them handsomely. He approves laws that explain themselves. He plays with a child who will one day play with a child who will never learn his name, because names in palaces are like water in channels, always moving while pretending to be stable. He does small kindnesses that no sculptor will carve, because sculptors prefer stories with chins and chariots, and a gently renegotiated tax on fish does not flatter a chin. Isis starts and finishes many small projects. She improves a bread recipe by a 6th and claims Thoth told her to, which might be true because Thoth advises everyone who will listen and some who will not. She writes to a queen in Byblos about a pillar that was once a chest, and the letter is mostly about household paint, which is how you know the friendship is real. On holy days, people draw the eye on their wrists with a paste that stains the skin for exactly as long as memory needs help. Mothers trace it on sleeping children, not because children need symbols to sleep, but because mothers like the way a symbol looks when it is doing something gentle. Scribes still use the eye to avoid fractions with terrible personalities. Bakers measure their flour and announce that the batch is 63/64ths of perfect, which is everyone's favorite amount, because it leaves a little room for the gods to add their pinch of blessing without spilling. In the great temples, priests tilt mirrors to invite sunlight into shadowed rooms, and the light behaves itself because even light is susceptible to polite architecture. When Horus presides over a festival, his headdress looks heavy but remembers to be well balanced. and his glance has exactly enough falcon in it to reassure people who like their deities avian. He greets farmers by asking about canal gates the way modern leaders ask about traffic. The farmers approve of this line of inquiry. They prefer gates that open and close when gates are supposed to open and close. On evenings when the wind smells like copper and distant figs, Horus returns to the marsh, which is still a hut and a doorway that prefers shade. The 7 scorpions lift their tails a respectful fraction and resume their watch, the basket scooting a little as if pleased. He sits where he used to sit, in the line between light and shade, and drinks beer slowly as if the cup is a thoughtful person. Isis tells him about a neighbor who has invented a new way to stack jars so fewer jars argue with the floor. He tells her about a law that makes it easier to count sheep. She counters with a recipe that makes it easier to count minutes until bread. They laugh the way people do when the day behaved itself. He asks again about the eye because he likes hearing about the day it became a measuring cup for fairness. She tells it, skipping the parts that would wake the geese. The geese are permitted to sleep. In the very gentle dark, he practices seeing without needing to decide, which is a kingly skill and a bedtime one. If you are still awake, this is a place where attention can be folded like linen. Consider the basket with the 7 scorpions under it, a practical dome for patience. Consider the fraction that is nearly whole and how the world loves nearly because it keeps the door open a finger's width for grace. Consider the tribunal chair that has probably been repaired 3 times and still looks official because authority is mostly how a chair holds itself. Consider the reed mat that records footfalls as lightly as a mind records small joys. The story could continue with a hawk crying at a horizon that has invited the cry with a scribe, closing his ink with a little sigh of a jar that knows it will be open tomorrow, with a child practicing the letter that means life until the letter becomes a shape his hand can make while talking about goats. It could continue indefinitely, which is part of the comfort. The marsh will always rustle. The lamp will always accept conversation. The eye will always be good at measuring more than one thing at once. Isis will always know where the lid is. And you somewhere between river and sleep may rest your gaze in that soft space where a verdict is a cushion, straightened by a mother where fairness tastes faintly of bread, where the night does not finish but hums the way reeds hum when the river thinks quietly to itself and the stars do their old arithmetic and nobody argues with the song. It starts with water that remembers the river but is trying to behave like silence. The room is called the House of Purification, which sounds grand, although it is really a tidy courtyard with a drain that has become very wise. Low lamps stand where a breeze can consider them without committing. A stone basin receives cool water as if it were a guest arriving late and not wishing to be seen. Neutron waits in a jar that takes pride in crisp corners. A long wooden table looks like it has learned patience from ships. Somewhere a reed mat keeps its patterns even when no one looks. The workers come in quietly, neither mourners nor priests exactly, more like serious gardeners, the sort who know how deep to plant onions. Anubis is here the way a steady hand is here, not dramatic, not absent. He approves of clean surfaces. He approves of measured breaths. He approves of lists that are short and actually followed. If you are listening in low light, the room is already friendly to you. And if you find yourself still awake soon, you may subscribe in the very relaxed manner of adding one more pebble to a little pile that was already aesthetically complete. Or you may not, and the basin will continue being the best listener in the building. Nothing in this place intends to keep score. The first sound is water touching stone with the confidence of a relationship. That goes back to before anyone invented dates for calendars. Linen hangs folded like good thoughts. A handful of natron rides on the water and dissolves without needing applause. The body waits, sincerely present, not a puzzle to be solved, but a conversation to be held with care. The wash is slow, not because slowness is holy, although it sometimes is, but because slowness lets the mind remember what the hands already know. They use ladles with the balance of birds and pour in arcs that would make a geometry teacher emotional. A scribe near the doorway marks the beginning of the work in a hand so neat that Papyrus blushes. He does not write the word beginning because the work is also a continuation, and most good beginnings are. Anubis nods once, which for a jackal-faced god is about as loud as clapping. He prefers competence to ceremonies, even though he understands ceremonies are how competence gets dressed for company. The courtyard is joined by a room, called the House of Embalming. Though house is a generous word for a series of work tables that know exactly how to be work tables. Here the natron is not a character. It is the weather. It comes in parcels that make little dry sounds that everyone loves. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, each with a story of meals and sentences and laughter, will have their own guardians. 4 sons of Horus keep their faces ready on the jars. Imsity looks like a person trying to remember your cousin's name. Hapi is a baboon who understands courtesy surprisingly well. Duamutef is a jackal with responsible shoulders. And Kebasanilf is a falcon committed to being useful. The jars are not scary. They are like polite roommates who each label their shelf. The heart, meanwhile, stays where hearts prefer to stay home because it will have talking to do where scales are involved, and it would be inconvenient to have to fetch it later. The brain is invited to leave by way of the delicate root, a practice that sounds dramatic when said quickly, but in this room is simply a task that belongs to someone who prides themselves on steady hands and good aim. A small hook appears, not menacing, more like a firm opinion. A helper holds a cloth under the nose as if the air might have questions. The work proceeds with the calm of experienced people folding laundry. Resins want to participate, and they do so like uncles who know a recipe. Pine and cedar arrive with the swagger of forests and then behave perfectly. Myrrh offers a perfume that has decided to be history. Frankincense is churchy even in a culture that invented temples before that word existed. The oils are warmed until they think about becoming language. A priest tests a mixture with a reed, not to taste it, only to listen. He decides it sounds ready. The body's cavities are rinsed with wine that has never met a feast, only a duty, and even the wine is dignified about it. Then natron lays its white line over everything and turns days into a number the room enjoys. 40 days is a nice round amount if you like your zeros soft around the edges. In that patient span, the workshop hums, a sound like bees if bees kept minutes and shushed each other occasionally. Anubis checks the temperature of the room by feeling the stone with the back of his knuckles. It is the oldest thermometer and the most flattering to stone. Bandages are the long sentences of this place. Linen strips are cut from sheets that once lay on beds near windows with few opinions. The strips are folded, then folded again until they think in straight lines. Every few layers, an amulet happens, not a surprise but a plan. A tie-it knot that stands for protection is placed like a comma between clauses. A jet pillar commits to backbone nests with the confidence of architecture. A tiny gilded scarab waits to remind the heart of its lines later when the scale wants conversation. Each amulet is a word the body will carry into a room where questions are short and answers must be exact, and the amulets enjoy the responsibility. The wrappings begin at the toes in a pattern that has been tested by centuries and found difficult to improve. The toes, who have always been modest, accept their socks made of time. Ankles become modestly elegant. Calves earn their stripes in the literal sense. Knees consider their long career of bending and rest from it. By the time the bandages reach the hips, the room smells like a cedar decided to whisper to a bakery. People imagine the coffin makers as serious men with adzes, and they are, but they also laugh at small jokes about glue, because glue is a comedian in every culture. The boards are cedar or sycamore, sometimes cheaper wood that has been patient enough to be painted with belief. A craftsman draws eyes on the outside because every good house has windows. Another paints stars inside the lid because a ceiling that can be night on command is good manners. The face on the coffin is calm and surprisingly specific, as if the artist could not help liking the person a little. Gold leaf is small sunshine that behaves even at night. The interior text, those columns of hieroglyphs that go on like a song without a chorus, are copied by scribes who measure each square with the same devotion they would lend to the spelling of a god's name. A little miscounted grid can cause a line break that annoys eternity, so they double-check everything and do not mind the time. The spells are from papyri that have saved many travelers from needing to improvise. The most beloved is the one that teaches a person how to address a door politely until the door remembers that all good doors love to open. In the corner of the house of embalming sits a basket with tools. Each tool looks recently told a joke and hasn't decided whether to smile. There is a spoon that only exists to hold an amount of resin that is always a little more than expected. A needle that understands arguments with thread. A small mallet that never gets dramatic about its contributions. A young assistant carries the mallet like a baby hawk. The senior embalmer uses a burnisher to coax gold to lie flatter, and it obeys because burnishers are authoritative without being rude. Someone in the doorway recites the names of minor guardian deities, all those fierce little colleagues who make paperwork into protection. The names click softly against the walls. The walls prefer to echo vowels. A date palm outside keeps time by refusing to rush. The sun turns politely on its old axle. Anubis inspects the basket the way an auditor inspects a well-kept ledger and finds that everything is exactly where it says it is, when enough days have been folded into salt. The natron is brushed away and the body reveals a new kind of quiet. The skin is oiled and becomes conversational again. Cavities are packed with resins and linen. Space is taught to remember shape. The jaw is tied with a band that leaves dignity at the edges. Fingers are given rings, not to flash, but to reassure joints that they are still themselves. The face receives a small attention. Cheeks are suggested the way a map suggests mountains with shading. Someone paints a line of coal where a memory of eyelashes will enjoy company. It is not vanity. It is coherence. People like to look like themselves when they travel. On a side table, small wooden figures, the Ashabdu practice looking attentive. They will one day be asked to answer, "Here I am," if work is mentioned in the afterlife, which is considerate delegation. No one really expects them to plow. They are there to show that the household thought ahead. The smallest Ashabdi is so tiny it must have been carved by a person who trusted magnifying sunlight. The procession day has a temperature remembered perfectly by stones. The opening of the mouth ceremony is ready in a kit that has been ready for generations. Adds, Pesach knife shaped like a crescent that has opinions about fish. Incense that thinks in curls. A piece of red granite that likes to be touched by words. The ritual is the gentle opposite of hurry. A statue stands as a representative, the way a passport stands for a person who is currently being searched by customs. The mouth is touched at the lips, the eyes at their corners, ears where listening becomes hearing. The idea is to return the senses to their desks after a long lunch. The priest speaks in the tense that makes reality obedient. Anubis looks on without adjusting anything, which is his highest compliment. When the adze meets the air before the lips, it is not cutting. It is remembering. Incense says yes in its own language. Everyone who has had a cold and then suddenly smelled bread again understands the joy hidden in this quiet moment. The statue glows a fraction more alive. So does the person it represents, in a place that has borrowed sunrise from somewhere we cannot point to exactly, outside. The canopic chest waits with the particular patience of furniture that knows it holds more than furniture usually holds. The four sons, person, baboon, jackal, falcon line up like a family portrait that has agreed on a palette. Their lids fit well because a carpenter with no time for sloppy lids took pride in them. Tight lids are an ethics. The chest is placed in the tomb with the confidence of a sentence that knows where its period will land. Beside it, vessels of beer and bread declare that hospitality continues even between addresses. The false door carved into the wall is not really false. It is a very specific door for the correct kind of visitor. Names are carved around it so the door will never forget which house it belongs to. A list of offerings is written with the hopeful thoroughness of a good grocery list. Bread of white flour, beer of the first pressing, beef, fowl, linen, incense, and all good and pure things on which a god lives. It is a generous list. No one expects the pantry to be empty. You may be thinking about the field of reeds again, and that is permissible. The workers sometimes think about it too, not because they are morbid, but because they like the idea that good work continues in pleasant weather. They imagine the deceased harvesting without weeds, drinking water that does not argue with the throat, visiting with old friends whose stories are precise and unhurried. The bandages these workers wrap today will unwrap into greetings there. The amulets will introduce themselves with good jokes and settle in pockets that do not wear out. Even the tools will have reflections of themselves in some quiet corner, a burnisher that smooths sunlight, a spoon that carries sweetness, a mallet that finds it no longer needs to make any point. The scale will be there too, steady as a patient bench, and the feather will be the same polite weight it has always been. The heart, feeling seen, will speak, but the workers do not rush that scene in their heads. They tie another tidy knot. They wipe a table, the way you wipe a thought so it shines again. The tomb itself is a small museum of attention. On the walls, pictures go about their business. Farmers harvest in ranks with the satisfying repetition of a pattern that never collapses. Geese walk like they were painted by someone who really liked geese, which is not a surprise given Egypt. Boats sail with unfussed sails that think about geometry but do not brag. Above, stars are drawn as five-pointed honesty. The ceiling knows how to be sky even when rock. A slit of light creeps across a corner at the same time every day, training the dust to dance on schedule. Those who enter speak names carefully, because names are keys and doors adore keys. A priest leaves a loaf whose crust learned Christmas from the oven of a woman who tells long stories to fire. Another leaves a jar sealed with clay and the scribe's stamp, essentially a polite, do not open until forever. The Ashabti get their final count, which is never the same number twice because counting is a little like prayer, not about arriving. Mostly about attention while counting that when the door is finally closed. And the noise of living goes on outside markets with arguments that never become real anger. Children learning to splash without apologizing to water, the tomb stays at its favorite volume. It will be visited, of course, by those who say the offering formula, those condensed sentences that bring bread and beer with sound. The formula feels legal because truth prefers the dignity of complete sentences. The stone knows the shape of the words like the cool of the stone. On festival days, a small procession passes and a young priest, who is still learning the weight of the incense burner, thinks carefully about his wrist. He will find its angle. The household will come with flowers that smell like mornings, and a dish of beans that smell like afternoons, and a touch on the door jamb that smells like years. The deceased will answer by way of the breath that continues in the field, which is not mysterious once you know it is just a very well-watered estate, dot back in the house of embalming, where the next gentle labor waits. The baskets are cleaned, and the floor is washed a second time simply because the first time was satisfying. The tools are counted. Someone says the names of the jars again to keep their company. Another writes a brief note on a scrap of papyrus about a better way to store bandages, so they do not develop opinions while waiting. Anubis pats the table once with his palm in a gesture that means this was good work. If he had a clipboard, he would initial it. He does not need one. In the shadows, a student memorizes the order of steps like a song learned by sweeping along the beat. He will get them wrong in ways that hurt no one and then get them right. In the alley, a cat makes a remark about fish to no particular audience. The drain accepts water calmly. It has accepted worse. The day lets itself be not quite finished. If you have drifted, a house of purification will continue without bragging. If you are awake, it has a few more sleepy details for you to hold like smooth stones. The possessed knife is said to remember the shape of a fish's tail because scissors had not yet been invented, and yet the gesture is unmistakably scissory. It opens nothing and still opens everything. The adze used in the mouth ritual is small and perfectly balanced, the kind of tool that would never leave a carpenter's pocket in the modern world. Kiffy, the incense that burns in a recipe written like a palm wine. Raisins, honey, myrrh, frankincense, and a few secret thoughts was sometimes taken as medicine at night. It taught dreams to walk politely along the corridor. The linen came from fields that learned patience from sunrise and then shared it with thread. This is why beds and bandages feel related. The painters who made the coffin faces kept small mirrors of polished metal near their palettes, not because the dead needed touching up, but because light likes to watch itself work and will do so in any shiny surface it can. Minor gods hover at edges. Cadet the frog says something optimistic in humid syllables. Taret the hippo mother snorts kindly at the idea of harm. Base makes a face so funny at nightmares that nightmares pretend to have other plans. All these things are very boring to Thunder, which is why Thunder almost never visits. The quiet is not absence. It is the shape of attention when it has decided to be gentle. People who come to learn here discover that gentleness has steps and tools and a schedule, and also that schedules are most beautiful when they bend like reeds and then stand up again. The last act, always, is to leave the room flatter than you found it. The last word, if there is one, is a name said like a door, you know? Softly and exactly. The basin sighs out a sip of water for itself. The lamp makes its agreement with darkness the way an old couple makes tea without speaking. Anubis stands and listens to a silence that will not need him for a while, and is glad for it. And the night, over courtyards and drains and jars with handsome lids, moves along like a steady brush over wood, finishing nothing, improving everything, ready to keep going as long as the stars enjoy being counted, and as long as hands like tidy work, and as long as sleep prefers rooms, where linen smells faintly of cedar and responsibility, which is to say a very long time indeed. There's a building that calls itself a scribe house, but behaves more like a nap for papyrus. Inside, shelves lean with the pleasant weight of rolled text, tied in tidy bow knots, and the air tastes faintly of reed dust, lamp smoke, and the polite sweetness of old ink. A pot of black sits beside a pot of red, and the red enjoys its reputation as the color that gets to announce headings, even when there are no headings to announce. A reed pen soaks in water that has decided to be quiet for the afternoon. Somewhere, an ibis stands in the doorway pretending to be uninterested, which is how Thoth often visits Beak, calm eyes. A god shaped like patience that learned to stand on one leg without calling attention to the achievement. The room's ceiling has a small crack shaped like a river delta. It is decorative by accident. At a long table, a scribe copies a line he has copied all his life, not because it is difficult, but because it is not. The reed pen makes a sound like a cricket that passed handwriting class. Thoth approves of this type of sound. He likes the noises that accuracy makes. If you are listening with your lamp low, you are already doing the correct liturgy. If in a few minutes you find yourself still awake, you may subscribe or simply nod in the general direction of the idea of subscribing, the way a librarian nods toward a shelf that is behaving. I will never know, and Thoth will not correct your punctuation about it. The point is to drift as if the line of text were a canoe and you, a very small, very responsible passenger, not in a hurry to reach any shore dot in the scribe house. Time does not so much pass as file itself. The morning pages become lunch pages, become afternoon pages, and the papyrus stack is pleased without needing to be praised. Thoth is said to have invented writing after noticing that words spoken to air often wander off to do farm work and forget to come back. So he taught reeds to hold ink and ink to hold memory and memory to sit in lines, and it worked, which is why the country became full of lists and prayers and receipts that behave with the dignity of small legal poems. When the wind moves, the scroll ends tap the desks with the faint discipline of a classroom. The scribes keep two kinds of quiet here, the quiet that means they are writing, and the quiet that means they are thinking about writing. Both quiets accept visitors, especially from cats who wander in to grade the sunlight. A junior scribe practices the proper order of signs for it to count, which in Egyptian is also a way to say to rejoice, because counting is a festival when the numbers line up handsomely. Thoth leans a thought against the boy's hand so the reed will feel steadier. The boy pretends it was his own idea, which is how blessings like to be received. Every so often, a page turns to calendars, which are Thoth's favorite kind of housekeeping. In Egypt, the year remembers the Nile like a person remembers a relative who always brings food. The river swells, fields draw lines for seed, bread happens again. Thoth keeps the story of days in a box of months that open well. He arranges 3 seasons with names that are basically practical advice inundation, growing, harvest, and then, because the sky enjoys exceptions, he adds 5 more days at the end to make everyone's arithmetic come out politely. Those days are said to belong to births of gods, which is reasonable for days that refuse to be counted with their neighbors. They are the bonus days, the way someone might gift you 5 extra figs and then pretend it was nothing. The scribes mark them in red ink to make sure the year doesn't forget its generosity. Outside, a water clock drips with the dedication of a monk who has found a very slow hymn. It measures hours by reminding the jar below to be patient. The school next door uses a shadow clock, which moves its little stick across tan lines on a stone, as if drawing the day a portrait of itself. Children behave for the length of a shadow, which is a reliable unit of obedience in many civilizations. At night, the scribe house pauses but does not sleep. The ibis steps to the lintel and watches the moon float in, a silver saucer that belongs to Khonsu. Khonsu is the moon on errand, the traveler, the one who walks time like a well-trimmed path, and sometimes lends his light to sick rooms because healing enjoys company. His name tastes like cool metal in soft bowls. People who are unwell call to him, and he pushes a little light through the window as if offering a clean spoon. Somewhere a priest sets a cup of water where the moon can see itself. In the morning, the cup's surface will have learned a kind of memory that feels useful. Khonsu is not dramatic about any of this. He makes circuits, counts nights, keeps months in a row, even when months would rather wander off to look at reeds. On some temples, the walls are a night sky that has decided to hold still. And there he is, a moon inside a moon, riding the boat that is a letter to the dark, saying everything that needs to be said with the limited vocabulary of glow. If a child stands under the window and tries to collect moonlight in his hands, Khonsu pretends the child is succeeding, because pretending is a holy art when it leads towards sleep. Back at the desk, Thoth writes the nights into columns with a neatness that convinces hours to agree with each other. He has a reputation for measuring so accurately that even truth consults him when it needs to be sure. Sometimes he uses his pen to stitch a torn story, mending a myth where the rough day tossed it against a rock. People tell how he repaired the Eye of Horus after that long, complicated family argument by adding fractions like a baker with a very tidy kneading board, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, and so on until the eye looked like itself again and could do the practical thing of measuring grain. The eye never quite adds to a perfect one in writing 63. 64th is the formal number, but Thoth smiles because the last little bit is for grace to add unnoticed. It's good to leave space for blessings. Even scrolls need room at the margins. Around him, the scribes have small disagreements about the best way to sharpen a reed. This is their favorite conversation. One argues for a longer taper to please the curve of an L sign. Another suggests a stout point for the energetic walking legs of a man with a staff. No one is wrong. The room tolerates all reasonable beaks. On the days when Khonsu's moon thins to a thread, the scribe house becomes a whisper about beginnings. New months like to be courted with bookkeeping. An elder scribe adds a dot to a table and the month appears, almost embarrassed to have been summoned by so small a mark. Khonsu slips out over the river to count crocodile backs, which are surprisingly good at reflecting starlight when they feel cooperative. He does not count them because he needs the number. He counts because counting is a type of affection. People in doorways nod. They know the rhythm: full, missing, returning, because bread rises in a similar way, and so do cats. Physicians, who are the close cousins of priests, sometimes ask Thoth and Khonsu for a recipe of hours that makes fevers polite. They receive it without drama, keep the room quiet, let the moon get a good look at the bowl, write the patient's secret name on a leaf, and fold it under the pillow so dreams will read it and behave. Remedies in Egypt are usually the calm enforcement of order. Like reminding water, it is excellent at cooling dot midway through the night. Thoth takes out a small box that could be nothing or everything, depending on your mood. Inside are tokens he uses not to enchant but to nudge. A tiny model of a scribe board that reminds students the board is not heavy. A thin cord knotted in equal spaces meant for the older temple's lamp keepers, who time prayers by touching knots like little doorbells. A sliver of polished stone that trains reflections to sit still while words land on them. He sets these on the table and arranges them into a small lesson for no one in particular. The lesson is mostly that tools enjoy being addressed by name. He whispers to the ink, calling it black that remembers water, and the ink obliges by making its lines straight of their own accord, which is, of course, a trick worked by the hand. But gods like to let hands feel accompanied. Meanwhile, outside, Khonsu tests the air with his silver spoon and finds it faintly cool. The kind of cool that teaches skin to be grateful. A jackal walks past, neither omen nor common, just a creature who prefers night corridors. In the water, a fish turns once and becomes a coin of motion, then shelves itself again in river silt, the way thoughts do when they are finished volunteering. The next morning, the scribe house remembers that life includes errands. A boy brings new papyrus sheets from a workshop where the river plants were persuaded to become pages by the timeless arts of soaking, pressing, and being sung to. Another boy returns with gum from acacia to thicken the ink so it will not run off to join the geese. Thoth enjoys errands that preserve clarity. He whispers a polite blessing on the rope that will keep the door from behaving like wind. He blesses the earthen jar that will not break, though it was once a handful of dust and an ambition. He even blesses a broom for its loyal argument with corners. People say he invented numbers and writing, but he is also rumored to have invented the reassurance that everything, given a list and a schedule, will be fine. Clerks love him for this. So do harvesters. So do doctors with tidy shelves. When afternoon rolls its warm shoulder through the doorway, a traveler arrives with a question about dates as in fruit, not time, and the conversation becomes a small picnic of knowledge. The scroll that tells farmers when to prune palms is unrolled with the seriousness one usually reserves for royal decrees. It turns out there is a right day, or at least a right feeling of day, which is near enough. Thoth adds a marginal note about a new observation regarding shade and sweetness, because gods like footnotes when they improve stacks. The traveler leaves a jar of honey and thanks, and the jar sits on the shelf like a sunny idea waiting its turn. In another corner, a woman from the weaving quarter asks about a good omen for a warp that has been moody. Thoth draws a tiny wedget eye at the edge of her pattern and tells the loom quietly that it is competent. The loom believes him. Tools often need compliments they can keep Dot as evening leans over the roof. The lamplighter moves from niche to niche with a wig that never scolds the oil. He stops before a small statue of Khonsu, wearing a crescent that looks exactly like the smile of someone who is trying not to smile too much. The statue's face is dignified and round. It resembles the moon in the way a clever carving resembles the truth after remembering manners. The lamplighter says something about his child's cough, nothing dramatic. Khonsu listens as if he can taste the air in the child's room already. A prescription for sleeping is written in the kind of words that soothed grandparents. Warm the feet, cool the forehead, tell the window to behave. Tell the darkness it may stay as long as it promises to help. Khonsu stands at the ready to pour a very small ladle of light into the corner where fear gathers and makes it uninteresting. He is good at making fear uninteresting. The moon rises in a demonstration of punctuality, a lesson the tide in far places studies with zeal. Once the night is well underway, Thoth sometimes climbs to the roof. Roofs in Egypt are excellent for deciding to be enormous when you need the sky close. He looks at the constellations, which are all the same family of familiar strangers, and he moves them into paragraphs only he can read. A woman below in the courtyard is grinding barley. The shape of her motion joins the sentence for a moment, then becomes its own steady punctuation. Thoth writes the character for time in the air and then erases it, because time has already written itself. He prefers to keep his handwriting for things that benefit from paper. Khonsu circles the roof like a friendly thought, checking the edges for any loose path. The ibis in the doorway tucks one leg up and closes one eye, then reopens it because it would be a pity to miss an interesting shadow. In the street, a dog remarks to no one that the night smells of figs. The remark is well received by other dogs, who also prefer figs when available. Midnight belongs equally to both gods, to the scribe who keeps the ledger of hours and the traveler who carries the lamp between them. A boy who cannot sleep sits with his grandmother and listens to her list the names of months as if they are cousins who send letters. Thoth notices and underlines the list in the sky so the boy will remember it later without trying. Khonsu sends a white crawl of light across the floor to reach the boy's blanket, the way a careful relative adjusts a corner that has escaped. In a clinic near the temple, a physician measures an infusion by shadows on the wall. The drip should last a verse and a half of a hymn, maybe two if the knight has learned patience. Thoth counts without moving his lips. Khonsu gives the cup a small blessing that looks like a reflection. The patient sleeps with the resigned relief of people who feel the world is full of professionals. Toward dawn, the scribe house becomes soft with the sound of sweeping, which is the oldest spell against confusion. The scrolls are checked to see whether they have multiplied overnight. They sometimes do, out of eagerness, and then tied with string that has opinions about neatness. Thoth puts away his little box of tokens and glances around for anything that has become untidy. He finds a letter half addressed to a water clock and finishes the address, because clocks like acknowledging mail. Khonsu is turning pale in the sky, thinking of bed. He will sleep in a shallow bowl left near a window. That is where moons rest in the morning. Before he does, he walks the patient corridors one more time, counting windows whose shutters learn to stay shut, measuring silences that will do until evening. He leaves a thin bookmark of light in the room of a woman who needs to remember a good dream, and a whisper on the reed. Pen that will begin today's work. The ibis fluffs its feathers, which are simply excellent, and pretends to be entirely bird for a while because being entirely God is a lot for before breakfast. Later, people come with small questions dressed as errands. A baker wants to know why his dough listens better on the third day of the moon. Thoth gives a mathematical answer that suspiciously resembles advice about room temperature, and hums something about youth liking gentle company. A clerk asks for a polite way to word a letter to a tax collector. Thoth gives him a formula full of greetings that behave like cushions. Someone on the market wonders whether Khonsu prefers offerings of milk or cool water. The answer is water, always water, poured with a slow hand so the surface can think. Through all of it, the reed pens keep their small cricket noise. The red ink gets to be read where a line wants the gentle drama of emphasis. The black remains serious enough to carry stories across hundreds of years without spilling them. The day will end, as days prefer to, by practicing sunset until sunset recognizes itself. The scribe house will close the shutters that have learned to swing at the same speed. A cat will walk the table with the supervisory delicacy of a person who used to be a god in a former apartment and still attends meetings. Thoth will put a dot where the work doesn't end but wants to rest. Khonsu will climb the stair of the horizon again, like a waiter who knows everyone's favorite drink and brings it before they point. If you are still awake, you may let the list of months line up behind your eyes. Thoth. Palpi, Hathor, Koyak, Tibi, Mecher, Faminoth, Farmuthi, Pachans, Pani, Epithi, Missouri, plus the 5 days who prefer to sit at the end like guests who brought music. They will not object if you forget one. Thoth collects drop names like coins and returns them without lecture. If you have drifted, the text will roll itself up carefully, the string finding its knot by memory, and the ibis will keep the door, and the moon will keep the road, and the quiet will keep the rest, while pens dry with the friendly sound of tiny sighs, and the shelves think approving thoughts about straight lines, and the hours continue to file themselves where they belong, exactly as softly as the gods intended, which is to say, so softly you might not notice you learned what time was. It is said that in Memphis, a god once sat very still and made a world by thinking about it properly, which is exactly the sort of project that appeals to evenings. The room was a workshop, or a temple pretending to be a workshop, full of plum wines that trusted gravity and chords that remembered how long they were without bragging. Tools waited with the quiet eagerness of cats before breakfast. Putta, whose job title is more or less architecture with good posture, considered the shape of things in his heart, which in Egypt is where thinking prefers to live. And then he spoke those shapes with his tongue, which is a very polite way to build a universe. No hammering, except in the pleasant metaphor of breath. He imagined doorways that open when greeted, ceilings that agree to be sky, foundations that say yes in stone. A mason somewhere centuries later would run a hand along a perfect joint and feel a little nod from that first decision. The air tasted like gypsum and calm. If you are listening now in a room that has decided to be gentle, you already understand the technique. And if in a few minutes you find you are still awake, you may subscribe with the same low effort as placing a nice pebble on an already nice pile. Or you may not, and Bata will continue thinking buildings into manners. Either way, the room will keep its good posture. Craftsmen like Peta because he made intelligence look like a well-organized bench. He was not a god of lightning. He was a god of string held taut between 2 points until the world decided to align. In the Memphite way of telling, Thoughts begin in the heart like blueprints folded inside a chest, then travel to the tongue, which says them softly until wood and brick take the hint. It is a method that flatters carpenters and poets equally. The chords laid over foundations were measured as if they were sentences. Every knot was a comma with excellent timing. Priests in white linen traced the plan with steps that had learned their distances, tapping pegs into earth with a ritual mallet that enjoyed being exact. A foreman would check the square and murmur "good" to no one in particular, because good squares enjoy compliments. If a beam bowed the way beams sometimes bow when they remember they were trees, someone warmed it with a patient fire until the idea of straightness returned. Ptah approved of this kind of persuasion. He liked that creation could be a conversation rather than an argument. In some hymns, he is said to have invented the gods the way an artisan invents hinges first in mind, then in speech, and finally in the pleasing, repeatable fact of movement. The city learned to breathe in time with that dot Memphis at dusk would be a relief to anyone who enjoys measured light. Bronze caught the sun as neatly as a student catching a chalk toss. On a key that smelled like busy water, a sculptor rinsed his hands and watched clay make its case for becoming a face. The statue he worked on had a calm that felt borrowed from Ptah's own expression, which is famously the expression of someone who has checked the plan twice and still has affection for it. In the street outside a shrine, a rope drum marked a pace that doors found reasonable. People carried small models of houses to the temple, not because the god needed more real estate, but because models are polite promises. On the altar, offerings lined up in a geometry of bread loaves and beer jars that would have made any surveyor proud. Even the incense followed a blueprint, climbing in straight columns as if trying to satisfy a habit of plum. If you have ever sorted a drawer and felt the pleasure of everything agreeing with everything else, you know the theology. Ptah's creation is a slow construction that keeps deciding to be kind to corners. Across the country, up where the Nile pats granite with the affection of an old friend, another kind of making happened with hands that preferred circles. On Elephantine Island, the water spoke several dialects of current, and Keenum listened as if he had all night, which he did. He is the god with the potter's wheel, horned like a ram whose thoughts are gentle and stubborn at the same time. If Ptah is architecture by sentence, Khnum is biology by spiral. He gathers clay from the silt left by the river's good habits, clay with a memory of mountains and fish and the soft exhale of flood. He sits at his wheel where shade braids itself with light and begins to turn. The turn is unhurried. A bowl appears, then a shoulder, then the suggestion of a hip. Sometimes he makes two bodies side by side like a potter, making helpful friends for a kill. He is practical. He adds little spines of clay where spines belong, presses the curve of an ear, decides hands should have the exact number of fingers that can hold a loaf comfortably. Hecate, the frog goddess with breath like a clean spring, leans in and gives the tiny chest an opinion about air, and the chest agrees. The Ka, the vital spark, is placed with the ceremony of placing a lamp in a quiet room. People imagine thunder for gods. Tem prefers damp hands and clay that keeps its promises. Elephantine liked to talk softly while Khnum worked. Satis, who minded the cataracts and the flow, watched from a rock with the attitude of a person who appreciates a well-regulated sluice gate. An-Ket, river quick and ribbon bright, brushed reeds with her calves and made the air smell like papyrus. They were the local committee for water behaving and brain appreciating that behavior. When Khnum lifted a little human from the wheel and regarded it with the half-smile of a craftsman pleased by a curve that did exactly what a curve should do, the river eddied in approval. In some images, he shapes not only bodies but destinies, little labels inscribed like kill marks. This one will keep goats and treat them as colleagues. This one will count and find counting restful. This one will invent a better basket mouth and become famous in 5 courtyards. He does not think in thunderclaps. He thinks in thumbprints. The room around him smells of wet clay, a favorite smell of persons who like potential. On a shelf sit earlier attempts bowls, jars, elbows that did not become people but are perfectly happy being bowls, jars, elbows of practice. Not every swirl needs a name. Some swirls simply prefer to hold water. Nem's wheel always turns at the speed of a nap, steady and a little hypnotic. He keeps a bowl of water to wet his hands, and the water reflects his work back to him, which is exactly enough praise for a god who enjoys feedback that doesn't talk too much. Nearby a kiln exhales now and then, but never with the impatience of modern ovens. This kiln is a large yawn with opinions about temperature. The glazemakers come by with the color that likes Egypt best, that blue that remembers sky and river at the same time. Crushed copper dreaming in silica until it becomes a promise of shine. They set small amulets on a tray, tiny inks, tiny jed pillars, and tell Gnome the batch will be ready when it is. He nods, because when it is the only firing schedule the wise accept. Heket hums a rhythm that eggs prefer when they decide to be more than eggs. If a dragonfly lands on the rim of the water bowl, Tian greets it as a colleague in light manufacture and goes on smoothing the shoulders of tomorrow's fishermen. The dragonfly approves without saying. Back in Memphis, the builders chalk a line on a wall and call it horizon for the day. And the chalk behaves because it admires Ptah. A young apprentice is taught to pull the measuring cord with the right kindness so it will hone its length instead of sulking at the peg. In the shade, a goldsmith engraves falcon feathers in gold that once thought it was sunlight and has not yet gotten over the compliment. He whispers Ptah's name before cutting, not as magic, simply as focus. In family courtyards, women grind grain on querns that remember mountains very specifically. They press dough into molds, and the loaves come out shaped like tiny pyramids, which makes the table look opinionated in a delightful way. Someone's grandmother says a loaf with sharp edges tastes more decisive, and everyone agrees because grandmothers have strong data sets. In Elephantine, Knim threads his thumbs under the ribs of a figure and lifts, and the whole river seems to remember the gesture when it rises each year and sets down silt where farmers can use it. The two creations talk to each other, lines and circles, blueprints and thumbprints, breath that is a sentence and breath that is a first small cry. Both methods respect good posture. Because Egypt enjoys precise days, there is a time when Ptah's priests perform the stretching of the cord. A ceremony where a goddess with the eye of a cow and a crown of stars, Seshat, the librarian of measurements, holds one end and the king holds the other, and together they declare a rectangle into being under the supervision of the sky. The cord stretches, the plumb bob nods, the stars pretend to be surveyors for the length of a ritual. A tablet is inscribed with the new plan, and the plan is considered polite enough to exist. If you have ever opened a blank notebook and felt the page accept you, you have experienced a civilian version of this. Meanwhile, Knum's workshop hosts quieter rites. A midwife wipes her hands and thanks Heket for giving the room its good timing. A scribe from Aswan brings a tiny jar of ink and says it needs a lid that will never stick. Tinum shapes a neat cap, then another, because lids enjoy siblings. A fisherman asks for a charm for knots that come undone only when asked. Kunum rolls a thread of clay around his finger and burns it into an answer. People bring small problems like they are bringing him pebbles to enjoy. He sets them on the shelf with the attitude of a collector of sensible things. There is a sleepy joke that Ptah invented doorways, so cats would have something to walk through a second time for emphasis. It is a respectable theory. Doors in Memphis behave as if they heard their names listed in a beautiful sentence and want to live up to it. Hinges call out softly when the air changes, not an alarm or hello. The city's canals prefer right angles because right angles make water feel organized, and organized water is comforting to grain. At night, when lamps turn into a small constellation of domestic stars, the streets smell like limestone, teaching heat to be memory. In the south, Elephantine glows with that pale granite comfort that makes nights feel intentional. Tim covers his wheel with a cloth as neatly as one tucks a child, and the cloth holds the shape of the day for a moment before forgetting. Frogs remark on the weather in the language of successful puddles. The Nile, which is the longest conversation people have ever had with water, continues to add its patient syllables. If you look at the faience amulets cooling on the shelf, you can see the philosophy of both gods in miniature. The inks are drawn with a loop that would satisfy Tim's taste for circles and a crossbar that would satisfy Ptah's love of straight talk. The jet pillars stack rings of steadiness while standing as a single column. Ribs and spine agree to share space. A tie-it knot bows to the belt it honors and to the mathematics of the hand that tied it. Every little thing here knows that beauty is accuracy remembered kindly. Even the kill bricks sit in rows that understand friendship. A child comes in to ask whether the new baby will like dates. Hecate assures the child that babies like whatever their grandmothers decide is traditional for the afternoon. The child accepts this scholarly update and goes away satisfied with the constant nature of snacks. Outside, a breeze counts palm fronds with its fingers and gets the same number as yesterday, which is comforting. People sometimes ask which creation is true, the one spoken by Ptah or the one turned by Khnum. And Egypt smiles the way people smile when a question forgets it might be happier as inventory. Both are true in the way morning and breakfast are true. One arrives because the sky insisted, the other because hands did. In Memphis, they say the temple rose because the plan was elegant and the joints believed in each other. In Elephantine, they say a body stood up because the clay remembered the breath, and the breath remembered to arrive. In farms between the two, people say the world renews itself every year, when the flood brings back the wheel's raw material and the brickmaker's dream at the same time. Ptah arranges the lines of irrigation, and Khnum fills them with a mud that calls wheat by its first name. Sadas opens the gates with an engineer's calm. An-Nuket ties ribbons on the season and calls it a festival. Households answer by washing their floors and pretending they meant to do that today anyway. The sleepy trivia accumulates in a way the brain enjoys when it is preparing to leave the room. Ptah's temple in Memphis had a sacred bull whose name means beautiful and who wore a sun disk as if it had no weight. A reminder that heaviness and lightness are not enemies in places where gods live. Tima's island learned to count years by writing them on stone in tiny neat numbers that looked like dew. The color blue that glows even when the lamp is shy comes from powders ground until minerals gave up their usual stubbornness and agreed to be sky on demand, which is a nice arrangement for jewelry and for dreams. Builders sometimes traced a plan in flour before tracing it in dust, before tracing it in stone. The birds appreciated the flour version very much. Potters kept a small lump of clay from each batch for good luck and labeled the lumps in a shelf of tiny memories. None of these details change the price of bread, and yet the price of bread likes them dot by the time darkness finishes its slow walk across the ceilings. The two workshops, one of chords and one of circles, have agreed on the day's work without needing to meet. Ptah's city turns in with the confidence of beams that trust their walls. Khnum's island finishes cooling. Frogs become punctuation on the edge of the river. Stars become an inventory of patient light. If you are still awake, you can feel the difference between a sentence that holds a house together and a spiral that describes a shoulder. And you can let both be true without politics. If you are drifting, the gods will continue their repetition, which is both ceremony and habit. The plan will be planned, the wheel will be turned. The breath will be given, the door will open. The baby will take dates very seriously. The kill will yawn and agree to make one more glaze the color of water remembering sky. No resolution is needed. The world is mid-project in a way that is comfortable for sleeping people. Ptah keeps the lines from arguing. Khnum keeps the clay from forgetting. The river keeps the calendar polite. Somewhere a craftsman sets down a tool in exactly the right place without looking. The tool is pleased. The bench is pleased. The night, which has appreciated good posture since the first line was drawn across it, resumes its work of being large and unhurried, while wheels slow their breathing and chords keep their lengths, and your own breath finds a rhythm very similar to both. A small sentence, a small circle, steady, accurate, enough. It begins with a ripple that is so polite you could miss it, a little fold in Nile water that knows how to approach a bank without startling mud. Beneath the surface, something large decides to be patient, which is the specialty of crocodiles. Sobek is here in the way the river is here. Very old, very calm, a body pretending to be geography. He wears a crown sometimes, but you would not notice. The current smooths everything into one long exhale. At Kam Ongo, the temple keeps a set of crocodile mummies in glass cases, their linen crisp as if it were starched by the moon. And even the tourists whisper because whispering suits glass. Priests once fed sacred crocodiles with the courtesy of waiters who know a favorite table, setting bread and meat on polished plates as if dinner were an offering and an offering were dinner. The river approves of such arrangements. If you're listening in a dim room, you're doing exactly what the Nile asks of banks at night. And if you remain awake after a few minutes, you may subscribe in the manner of tossing a smooth pebble back to the water you borrowed it from. Or not, and Sobek will continue tending current and teeth with equal professionalism, which is reassuring. The god himself is not a menace here, or an uncle who prefers heavy furniture and good irrigation. He admires canals that keep their agreements and gates that know the difference between open and almost open. In Fayum, where the lake holds sky like a deep bowl, villagers once greeted crocodiles the way city people greet buses, with practical affection and a strong interest in schedule. Fishermen learned which sandbars were not really sandbars. They left those alone. Children stood at respectful stone's throw away and waved at whatever was pretending not to watch them. Sobek liked discipline disguised as friendliness. He liked workers who repaired levees before storms needed to form opinions. He liked the yearly flood the way bakers like yeast, a reliable collaborator that asks only for time and warm hands. When priests mixed ointments for his altar, the smell was river plus sun plus the clean edge of matron, a scent that made even the crocodiles look as if they were having a neat thought. You could say his theology was water kept in rows. Movement with manners. Walk a few hundred slow miles and the water conversation becomes a domestic purr. In the Bastis, cats trim the daylight into comfortable pieces and pile them on doorsteps. Bastet, the soft paw that is also a very good set of claws, if required, patrols households with the expertise of a head librarian, who has read every book and decided where sunlight should fall. Her temple once carried a perfume that seemed to have learned to walk, lotus and myrrh and the tidy, sweetness of pressed flowers tucked into linen. People visited to ask for uncomplicated favors sleep without interruption. A child's fever to behave, a mouse to remember other opportunities far from kitchen shelves. Cats lounged magnificently in places that were never meant for lounging. They sat on ledgers, on half-finished letters, on royal directives if one were available, because paper is warm to cats even when it is stone. When a bowl of milk appeared, the oldest cat took the first sniff and nodded. Younger cats understood this was not hierarchy so much as quality control. Bastet liked families who respected naps. There was quiet music in her halls, a soft rattle called a sistrum that made air sound domesticated. The instrument fit the hand the way a spoon fits soup. Shake, and tiny metal tongues answered with the voice of a breeze through reeds that had decided to be cheerful, but not ambitious. The sistrum woke nothing. It only convinced Shadow to sit up straight. Women played it with a little tilt of the wrist that looked like turning a page. In the market outside, sellers repeated the names of figs and onions with the affectionate accuracy of people introducing friends at a party. With one very large table, a potter stacked feeding dishes with the stable geometry of pancakes. A boy learned the difference between being scratched for education and being scratched for insolence. Cats modeled serenity. People tried to keep up. If a bowl broke, it was swept and replaced. And Bastet made a note on the household's invisible report card that the floor had. Learned about edges, and the lesson was sufficient some nights. When the sky remembered it had many gentle stars to supervise, the city celebrated with the kind of dancing that makes sandals feel they are being stroked. Bastet liked music that never spilled. Lamps winked from balconies in friendly Morse. Owners who had the honor of being chosen by cats placed small mats in windows so fur would have a view. Someone read a list of names for the goddess lady of perfume jars, she who listens. Mother of kittens, and each name made the room feel slightly more ventilated, as if titles were windows that opened in new directions. Milk, beer, and stories were poured with comparable ease and comparable results. The point was not to arrive anywhere. The point was to make presence look like a skill. If a cat climbed your shoulder, you were promoted to furniture. This was generally considered auspicious, where Bastet made thresholds cozy, Hathor made horizons friendly. She had the ears of a cow, which is to say she heard with the patience of fields. People called her Mistress of Jubilation and Mistress of Turquoise, titles that sound like jewelry but behave like weather. In her temples, the columns bloomed into capitals shaped like her face, serene and slightly amused, as if she knew you were thinking about bread while pretending to think about theology and approved. Her festival mornings were gentle, a procession of mirrors angled to catch sunlight and distribute it like polite gossip. Necklaces of minute beads swung against the chest with a wooden clock that seemed to fix the day's rhythm into a reassuring loop. Perfume walked again. It had many errands in this country. Memory says the sistrum belonged to Hathor as well, and memory is right, because joy shared is joy that multiplies without affecting inventory. She loved marriage ceremonies, not because vows are dramatic, but because they are paperwork that makes affection official. She presided over music that never reached for climax. It circled like boats choosing to keep the shore near. There is a story old as dust about Hathor having a more serious sister who wore a lion's temper and the sun on her brow segment. An afternoon that could be too bright if you forgot your hat. We will not let that story gallop. Here it is, a housekeeping anecdote. Once the world needed cooling, and the remedy was not thunder but a beverage. The beer was tinted a gentle red with fruit and herbs. It was poured in places where anger had been practicing speeches. It looked like sunset in bowls. Sekhmet found the color pleasing, took the invitation, and discovered a different project: napping. A god can be as cranky as a cat at the vet. A nap solves more problems than an army. Priests commemorated the solution by brewing on a generous scale and reminding everyone to drink water between cups, which is the sort of ancient wisdom temples excel at. In the soft version, the lioness learns she enjoys shade and stories. She keeps her claws filed in a decorative way. She watches over medicine jars and suggests extra mint. Her festival is sometimes called the Day of Drunkenness, which sounds exciting, but in practice it was mostly laughing at a reasonable volume and discovering the floor is a friend. When you walk from Hathor's courtyard back toward Bastet's neighborhood, you pass homes that smell like soup and fresh rush mats. The door lintels wear the widget eye as if it were a polite doorman. A child is told to carry a jar with both hands and practice being a small temple column. He does so gravely and mostly remembers the jar. Mothers grease braids with a little oil and tuck a tiny amulet in place where luck can see it. A grandparent tilts a mirror to welcome a wedge of light that has been punctual for years. Cats need the bedding with needs that could be medically prescribed for nerves. Everyone knows that Hathor also keeps cows, those walking clouds with tails, and that milk is goodness you can pour. So milk is poured, and butter is a solved riddle. Somewhere a traveler touches a Hathor pillar and feels ready to go slightly farther than yesterday, not for conquest, just to see what grows beyond the next line of shade. Sobek visits these streets from time to time in the same way a river sends a breeze upriver to check on laundry. His priests consult with canal keepers about silt and with fishermen about nets that want to be straight. He doesn't mind Bastet having the best windowsills. He prefers doorways that look onto water. Cats watching crocodiles are politely interested in the concept of very big lizards that have discovered office hours. Crocodiles watching cats are politely interested in how one becomes furniture with such confidence. Each admires the other's tail. At dusk, when the Nile cools its shoulders, a boy sets a palm leaf boat on the water with a tiny clay cat aboard. The toy sails for 3 steps of the current, circles twice as if considering employment, then parks itself by a reed that has prepared for exactly this career milestone. The boy is satisfied. Bastet is satisfied. The reed looks busy. In the quiet after supper, the small ironies are the best companions. People who pray to a cat goddess also save scraps for dogs. The world makes room. Women who shake the sistrum for Hathor can shush a house to sleep with the same wrist. Men who shovel silt for Sobek fold napkins with surprising elegance. Good hands learn more than one kind of meat. On Kam Ombu's wall, a bas-relief shows medical tools set out like a considerate buffet. Forceps, blades, a scale, little bottles. Sekhmet likes that wall. It promises competence without bragging. In Bubastis, a child is told that if a cat breaks a jug, the cat is a god deciding ceramics need new research. The child believes this and enjoys pottery more. Hathor's musicians practice the same 2 chords until the chords become a path. Their instruments shine a kindly bronze. A jar of beer sweats decoratively in shadow. The evening chooses a speed and keeps it. There are sleepier details if you want them. Hathor's priests sometimes dyed their linen a shade of faint gold, the way bread thinks about being brown. The minute necklace, when shaken gently, sounded like beads agreeing to be social. In late summer, when the desert waved heat like a fan, people filtered beer with baskets that had learned to be sieves and drank it through straws that kept the barley husks agreeable. At Kam Ombu, there was a calendar of days lucky for cutting toenails. It is reassuring to know that even toenails had a bureaucracy. Cats could be mummified with little masks and tiny bandage patterns, dignified as letter openers promoted to executive roles. In Fayum, crocodiles sunbathed in a way that made them look like garden statues loaned out by a patient god. Some wore jewelry once, collars with shells, because the line between sanctity and accessorizing is very thin in good light. The river keeps turning its pages. It lifts water into fields, sets it down, takes it away again, repeats. Sobek supervises like a lifeguard who is also a hydrologist. Bastet watches for mice in the granary and for worries in the bedroom. She removes both. Hathor finds the rhythm that puts a baby to sleep and gives the same rhythm to a grown person who forgot it. Sekhmet wakes once to check the temperature of the year and goes back to her chair, which she has decided to call a throne to make the cushions behave. The gods do not end their shifts. They overlap like tall reeds leaning together. A fisherman ties the same knot his grandfather tied and thinks the same. thought about currents being opinions that need respectful rebuttal. A baker powders a loaf with flour that looks like early light. A girl invents a new way to carry a jar and walks across the yard like a tiny star moving deliberately. If you are still awake, you can let the four presences sort the room into comfort. Put Sobek near the window where the air comes from. He understands directions. Put Bastet on the shelf above your heart. She prefers heights that are also laps. Put Hathor at the door as hostess, gold without glare. Put Sekhmet in the corner with the medicine and the fan, a specialist in better afternoons. They will tidy your thoughts without rearranging anything important. They work the way the Nile works, by repetition more than intent, by small useful habits. And if sleep arrives with a paw touch or a slow tide, the gods will go on being themselves, which is mostly the art of keeping things slightly better than a moment ago. The crocodile will breathe under the skin of the river as if the river had decided to have a spine tonight. The cats will choose diagonals that respect geometry. The sistrum will remember not to rattle louder than lamps. The lioness will sip something rosy without needing to explain her methods. Later still, when night has folded all the street corners into neat triangles and left only the sky on top, you might hear a boat slide along the bank with the whisper of a palm leaf on silk. The water lays down its last shine. The city clicks into its arrangement of doors, each one having a private agreement with shadow. In one house, a child sleeping with a cat breathing on his feet dreams of a festival where everyone is dressed as cows, but in a flattering way. In another, a woman dreams she is a mirror and wakes feeling very reflective. Somewhere a crocodile dreams of warmer stones and wakes to find stone temperature is, as always, a solvable problem. The temple guards lean their spears against walls that will remember the angle and teach it to morning. Nothing ends exactly. The river will check the banks again. The cats will hold their meetings at times that remain classified. Hathor will lend daylight a generous, buttery accent. Sekhmet will look at the calendar of toenails and decide today is acceptable. You may drift now or drift later. The breeze knows your schedule. If you stay, we could count how many beads are on the minute by touch alone, but counting in the dark is a little like prayer, and prayer tends to finish itself without you. If you go, the gods will keep the lamp low, and the room tidy and the water quietly persuasive, so that when you return from sleep, there is nothing to fix, only the pleasant, endless maintenance of a world that likes you, a world where crocodiles practice good posture, cats curate sunbeams, cows guard music, and lions keep an eye on fevers. All of it slow and useful, all of it familiar, all of it humming in that secret register where even worries feel house-trained. And the night continues, which is exactly its job.